Mental roadblocks. It's a term that you hear thrown around a lot, but do you actually know kind of what it means? If you don't know what it means, it is basically something that blocks you mentally if you're trying to work on a task, whether that's something creative or whether that's something in your day-to-day life. Today, I'm gonna go into talking about mental roadblocks, the 3 types of mental roadblocks that I believe exist, and talk about my experience with them as well, and how I attempt to overcome them, because not everything's perfect. But we're gonna talk about it, so focus in and let's get into it. Jumbo, my friend, I'm glad you're here. This is What the Foss, a podcast where, well, I want to go into the normal intro thing that I do, but the real problem I've had is that this podcast, while it's been a good learning experience, I'm not saying that's done, don't get me wrong, I'm not tapping out, all right, but I'm trying to figure out what to do with it, or where to go with it, or what topics to go into, because I've had a lot of mental roadblocks when it comes to this podcast. And they seem to just kind of wear me down in the sense that I tend to be thinking that some things are wrong the way I'm doing them, or some things aren't interesting, and that some things need to change. So there will be a couple changes coming to the podcast as things move forward from here. And I'm gonna talk about specifically mental roadblocks, because that has been something that has gotten in the way for me, and that has been a big problem for me when it comes to like creative type outlets, because you have to express yourself. You have to basically be yourself, and you don't have to be monotone in the camera and bore everybody to death. And that's some problem that I've had. But going into the 3 real quick, and I'm gonna work on making these podcasts a little shorter than I have in the past for reasons I'll explain. But speaking of the past, that is one of the types of mental roadblocks that we're going to talk about, is dealing with things in the past. Previous wrongdoings of things can create this doubt in your mind, and it allows you to not really trust your own decisions. So if you think about things in the past, I'm going to use the podcast example. You insert whatever example you want to from your past, because you know what? Every single person has them, and everyone has these types of roadblocks that come up from our past, because they have to do with previous wrongdoings. So if it's this podcast, I felt like in the past I was super monotone, and the podcast would be like 30 minutes, and I would just ramble on about a topic, not even talking about it with any interest either from my end, and it wasn't interesting to you. And learning from those, I think the biggest way to do that without having this mental roadblock and worrying about the past, one of the key things that I've taken away from a book I recently read, it was by David Goggins, and this book talked about an after-action report. Now, I had heard this before from different people in military areas, but after-action report is basically a retrospective, totally like unbiased, honest review of something that happened. You take that thing that happened, you write it down as clearly as you can, with no bias about it, not trying to sugarcoat it or anything, just write about it, what exactly happened. Then go into saying why things might have gone negatively, and then go into why or how you could change that. And you basically do this in 3 paragraphs. It takes like 10 minutes of your time. I promise you can do it between your episodes of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, or whatever you watch, on your streaming service. And just take that time, write these 3 paragraphs about the past action that happened, wrong things that happened, and what you can do to change it. Once you really take a look at what happened, you'll notice that the fears and the doubts that you have about these things in the past, they're not really justified. They can't really be generalized to everything that you have now. So go into that thinking about the past. But what if you have some more present doubts or present mental blocks? Perhaps you're like overthinking the small things that happen, right? It's these small thoughts, and these small thoughts tend to build up to these bigger worries. I tend to have these with the podcast. I tend to have these thoughts, oh man, am I being monotone enough? How's my posture? When I'm sitting, am I just draining on about a topic? The big thing that you have to do with this, instead of just thinking things over. As humans, we tend to do this type of over-analytical thinking. At least I do. I don't know if you do, but I tend to do this over-analytical thinking, and I try to think through all my decisions and think, oh, this will be the best outcome, but what if this happens? And I take all this wasted time trying to think through stuff instead of just deciding on one and choosing one to do. So the biggest thing I would say for present kind of mental roadblocks, just make quicker decisions. If you're going to try something and you have a couple options of what to do, literally just pick one. I promise you, if you just pick one of those options, you won't worry about overthinking, because if you choose to do nothing, that's still also a decision. So if you have that, just make quicker decisions and test stuff out. If it works, cool. If it doesn't, also cool. You figured out a way not to do it. But what if your doubts aren't even here yet? What if there's something that is about the future? That's the third area. So we've covered past, present, kind of mental doubts that tend to be these mental roadblocks. And now we're thinking about future ones, because sometimes when we foresee things in the future, we foresee these really like bad outcomes happening, and these things that we think is just going to be kind of the worst case scenario sometimes. And when this happens, we totally freeze up. And when we do freeze up, it's not anything good in any way to freeze up like that. And what really happens is we just don't do anything. So if you're worried about stuff that, by the way, hasn't even happened yet, but I do that all the time when I'm thinking about, where is this podcast going? Am I just going to shut it down because not that many people are going to listen to it? Am I even talking about stuff that people want to hear? And when I go through those, I got to remind myself of some of these past successes. So for me, it's that I've been able to set up my own fitness business. I've been able to launch some stuff out with podcasts and YouTube and get some generally good feedback for most of those. And it's a learning process. So just remember to remind yourself of past successes in this in order to translate it to the future. But what if you don't have those past successes? What if you haven't really done that thing before? For example, I can't say, oh, well, due to my past cello experience, I'm going to be an amazing musician come the near future. I've never even played the cello. And if I'm going to do that, then I don't have any past successes to show to my future. So if you don't have any past successes, even better, I say. That's basically that you have no data to basically justify anything of the outcome of your future. You don't have any of these past failings in that thing to be able to justify that why this thing in the future would suck. So the biggest thing I would say is that it's a blank canvas. So you basically just need to either A, remind yourself of past successes, or B, if there isn't any success, go back to the thing that we talked about with the present mental roadblock. Just make a quick decision, decide something, do anything. And if you go off this route and you just try to make quick decisions, you're not too hard on yourself from the things that happened in the past after you really analyze it. And you also look at the future in a more positive mindset instead of all the worries and fears that could come out of it. So I thank you for your time. I hope that you enjoyed this. If you got anything out of it, I would love to hear your feedback. You can either message me at the Coach So You Know or at Foss Movement Training on most of my social media handles or website. So thank you so much. Just remember, take chances, make mistakes, and if you get into a roadblock that kind of hits you mentally, just remember to kind of change up what you do, make a good mental decision, and as long as you try to make changes, that's the best thing you can do. Talk to you soon.